Hello, Haunted Family. Welcome back. Story 1. My home growing up. I grew up on a farm in western Nebraska, in a house my grandfather had built, where his body was laid for viewing after he died. Unusual occurrences were common. Footsteps, banging noises, cold spots, feeling of dread were commonplace for me. Our family would gather at the dinner table for supper, and we'd hear a door slam upstairs. We'd all just look at each other, and someone would end up making a joke. I don't recall my age exactly, maybe 9 or 10, when I worked up the courage to ask my mom if there were ghosts in our house. When I did, instead of being reassuring and saying there's no such things as ghosts, the answer that I was really hoping for, she just looked at me sweetly and said, "Oh, honey, they're just family. They're not going to hurt you." I can't begin to tell you how that made me feel. I was still clinging to some hope that it was just my silly, childish imagination. My sisters and I saw, at one time or another, an apparition walking upstairs, outside of our bedrooms, each young mind rationalizing it in our own way. I saw Cousin It from the Addams family. Another sister saw a clown, so on and so forth. Although we were scared to death of the dark and of our closets, and of the basement every day we lived in that house, it wasn't until I was 19 that I was absolutely terrified there. My mother had been diagnosed with lupus in 1970. The disease finally took her from our family in 1978. I had gotten my first job. I had moved out on my own. Dad had gone on a trip and wanted me to stay at the house to keep an eye on things while he was gone. I loved to read. I was sitting in my mom's big comfy rocker with a book when I started hearing this odd noise from outside. It started out very low, just barely audible, and then it would get louder. I honestly can't describe it exactly, except that it was muffled and mumbled. I turned on the outside light on the south side of the house and saw nothing, so I continued to read. Again, the sound comes from outside, behind me. Started low, then increasing in volume, still muffled and mumbled, but occasionally sounded like children off in the distance, chattering as they played. It's 11 p.m. in the middle of rural Nebraska. There are no children running around outside playing. I started to become more uneasy at this point and decided I was going to brave it out. I turned on the outside lights. I grabbed a flashlight from the drawer and headed outside to investigate. The closer I got to that side of the house, I started getting goosebumps on my arms. I looked around the house with the flashlight, and there was nothing there. I stopped to listen, as best I could. My heart was beating so loudly in my ears. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So I chalked it up to a hurt animal, further out into the garden or something. This continued to happen throughout my stay there. In a couple days, Dad returned, so I went home to my apartment. A few weeks later, I decided to go out to the house and have a talk with Dad about what happened. I pulled up into the yard, shut off my car, opened my door, and before I could take my first step, the noise began, only this time much, much louder. It was so creepy that the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I was so freaked out that I just screamed at the top of my lungs that whatever it was needed to stop. But it continued, and it got louder. Almost like whatever was making that sound was coming right towards me. I screamed for my dad, but he was inside and didn't hear me. I jumped back into my car and I raced home. I called him and I told him what had happened to me before and just now. I asked if he had ever heard anything weird. He told me that he had been hearing it for a couple weeks before he left and again since he had got home. It lasted for a few weeks after that, and then it stopped. We'll never know exactly what was making that horrible sound. Thinking about it now, 30 plus years later, I still get goosebumps. It couldn't have been an animal. My dad checked the whole yard multiple times. For several days in a row, while it was light outside, and found nothing. I just know whatever it wasn't family. It wasn't good. And I wasn't going to hang around to find out what the hell it was or what it wanted. Story 2. The Night in Pennsylvania. I had just moved to New York from Pennsylvania. I was visiting my friend for a few days because my parents and I had came back to Pennsylvania to visit family and friends. Her and I always talked about ghost stuff, just to scare each other. She lived in this big, wide house on a back road. There isn't many houses on that road. It's mostly just wooded area. Therefore, it's kind of creepy at night. We were in the basement watching horror movies, eating ice cream, drinking soda. You know the thing. Her parents and older brother, who I'd secretly been in love with forever, were sleeping upstairs on the second floor. Her brother had a friend over also. We had to flip a coin to see who got the basement, since her parents didn't like the idea of 4 kids of mixed gender in the basement together all night. Anyway, we were sitting on the sofa, cuddled up, watching a movie, when we heard something in the other side of the room fall. Her basement is divided in 2 parts. We both got really scared, like teens tend to get when watching scary movies. We looked at each other and ran up the steps to her brother's room. We told him and his friend what had happened and asked them if they could come down and check. They laughed at us, but decided to come down anyway. My friend and I jumped on the sofa, and the 2 guys went in to check it out. When they came out, they looked rather scared. They wouldn't tell us what they saw, just made us come up into their room with them. My friend and I were bugging them to just tell us what they saw, but they wouldn't. So my friend's brother told me and his friend to go downstairs, grab some junk food, some soda, grab a movie, and come back up. As we're going down the steps, his friend says to me, "I don't really think I'll be spending the night here anymore." I just kind of laughed and said, "Why?" And then he told me what they saw in the basement. He said they opened the door, and there was this black figure, like the body of a child, sitting in the computer chair. He said they could hear it breathing. So we get the soda from the fridge, and then we see something walk past the doorway in the hallway, going towards the living room. I jump and scream a little bit, and he tells me I need to chill out. That it's probably just my friend and my friend's brother trying to scare us. We walk into the living room, we look around. There's nothing there. We grab our stuff, we book it back upstairs. When we got to the room, my friend was there, but her brother wasn't. She said he saw something walk past the doorway, heading down the hallway into the extra bedroom. So he went to see what it was. When he got back, he said he couldn't find anything. So we were all just sitting there on his bed, really freaked out and scared. We were talking about it, talking it through, trying to figure out what was going on. My friend and her brother said they had never had anything happen like this before. Then we heard something walking up and down the steps. We heard children laughing. We got up, we locked the door, and we went to sleep. We just laid there, for the longest time, talking about stupid stuff to take our minds off what had happened, until we drifted off to sleep. Their house was never haunted before, and after that night it never seemed to be haunted again. We can't really explain this. Story 3. My friend's apartment. I had this friend when I was about 15, who lived in a little apartment in our town with her mom. I found out later that this apartment, which was really in an old building that used to be a storefront, used to be a doctor's office. Weird things used to happen there all the time. My friend told me that she was having a fight with her mom, and the sink would turn on and start running, or the TV would come on full blast. This stuff seemed to happen more and more often when people in the apartment were mad or fighting. One time I was there, and we came home from school, locked the door, went into her bedroom. When we came out about an hour later, the front door was standing wide open. Odd. One night I slept over. I stayed in her bedroom, and my friend slept on the couch in the living room. Her bedroom in the apartment had no windows, so when you turned off the light and shut the door, it was pitch black. Absolute total darkness. In the middle of that night, I woke up from a dead sleep, sat straight up in bed, and this is when it gets crazy. Although the lights were out in that room, and it was absolute dark, I could see everything in her room as if the lights were on. I remember seeing stuff on her dresser, on the floor. I remember that my eyes were wide open. I couldn't have been dreaming. At the foot of her bed, she had a desk with a chair. There was a man sitting in that chair staring at me. He had blonde hair, but I couldn't really make out his facial features. I shook my head and everything became darkness again. I only saw the man for a few seconds before I shook my head, and everything went dark. I got really freaked out. I ran into the living room and slept on the floor next to my friend. At first I thought it was just a dream, but I know I was awake. I know my eyes were open. I could see the whole room perfectly, and the lights were off. It wasn't until I shook my head and ran out of the room that it became dark again. I almost never wake up in the middle of the night. I'm a very sound sleeper. I've thought about what happened a million times, and I've decided that whoever that man was not trying to scare or harm me. He just seemed curious. This happened over a decade ago, and I've only told a couple of people, because it's kind of an odd story. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed these stories. If you did, hit the like button, leave me a comment, subscribe if you want to. I appreciate it all. Thanks for listening. Bye. Music by Carl Casey at White Bat Audio.